Welcome to a history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll Patreon bonus episode 1. I would like to start episode 1 with some chapter 1s, some introductions maybe from a few different books that I thought were, nice, informative even, and not used yet in any episode of the show that I can recall. I'm going to start with Ed Ward from the History of Rock and Roll, Volume 1, 1920 to 1963. I have probably roughly 20 to 30 bookmarks in this thing, and I don't think I've utilized most of them for an episode. I just keep thinking I'm going to come back to these little bits and bobs here and there, and it's been so long that I don't remember what they were all for. Some of them are general, some of them are specific to an artist I haven't covered yet, like the second Chuck Berry episode I haven't done, or the Little Richard episode I haven't done yet, things like that, or Buddy Holly. But I'm going to read the intro and then the first, chapter 0 it's called. The intro is titled, How to Use This Book. This book is written to be read from the first page to the last, telling a story in sequential form, just like any other narrative history. It's possible to do this at much greater length and much greater detail. Witness Taylor Branch's magisterial 3-part history of America's struggle for civil rights led by Martin Luther King Jr., or Claude Manceron's almost novelistic 5-parter on the French Revolution. So he's coming in heavy. He's likening his approach, if maybe not his writing, to these masterful multi-volume tomes of historical value, great historical value. Let's see. But I wanted to make this story thorough yet accessible to the kind of people who don't enjoy gigantic reads as much as I do. See? He's a smart guy. He likes the big books. You don't like the big books. And that's how, this is him, and he gives himself a little trap door to escape with this logic later on. I also wanted to try to impart the excitement I experienced once I grabbed a ride on what turned out to be a lot more than popular music, a corner that was turned after this book's narrative ends, but one we can see approaching in its last pages. I deliberately steered away from the great performer approach to the story, because although you can't ignore Elvis Presley's or the Ray Charleses here, the less well-known figures have gave context to what they achieved and played in their parts in shaping the eras in which they were active, often in this part of the story, only in one part of the country, and to a non-mainstream audience. I think that's a great point. I think it's borne out in everything that I have read in this book and other books as well. A lot of stuff that happens outside the main narrative of what, Elvis Presley was doing at the moment that shaped what rock and roll became. They were, many of them, rediscovered after their years in the spotlight and influenced a lot of music several decades later, which also gave many of them second careers. Also, the people who took it upon themselves to supply the music these people made to the marketplace of jukebox operators, radio stations, and record stores, record biz people like Sam Phillips, Sid Nathan, Art Rupe, Mimi Treble, Vivian Carter, Berry Gordy, Phil Spector, and Florence Greenberg, need their roles documented, and I've threaded them in among the performers, as well as songwriters and instrumentalists in this era before the writer-performer became the default model. And I think, from what I know, that default model came about because of people like Chuck Berry initially, and I think was pretty well solidified by people like Bob Dylan 10 years later. To this end, I've tried to make the experience of reading this book as smooth as possible, but there are a couple of places where the reader is presented with some long lists of names and songs and or performers, as for instance the fat list of records released in 1957 that are considered essential classics today, but never even hit the regional, let alone national charts, page 154. These should be welcomed as opportunities to explore. If you already know the material, you'll get the point. But if you don't, the ease of finding this music presented by online sources these days sets you up for hours of exploration and, I hope, enjoyment. Some of the sounds take a bit of getting used to, but I envy the person hearing this music for the first time, as I'm sure a lot of you would be doing. Make playlists, check out videos, or, as old-fashioned as it may seem, go deeper by buying actual CDs. which often have liner notes illuminating the music far deeper than I can, and at their best can provide an in-depth look at a performer or genre. And you may notice that with a cast of characters as large as this, many of them drop out of sight after their first appearance or after their careers take off. If reading what I have to say about them here and your subsequent enjoyment of their music whets your interest, by all means pick up books dedicated entirely to them. Such authors as Peter Guralnick, his 2-volume biography of Elvis, and books dedicated to Sam Cooke and Sam Phillips are unparalleled. Robert Gordon on Muddy Waters and Stax Records, R.J. Smith, Central Avenue, and James Brown, and many others listed in the bibliography are the great places to start. Only Pete Frame's astonishing Restless Generation about British rock and roll up to 1960 wasn't published in the United States, but again, it's well worth finding. From the records and books, you can progress to the films, of which there are an increasing number, many of them well-researched documentaries. But don't stop at the documentaries. Some of the contemporary films are worth watching too. I'd list The Girl Can't Help It, Jailhouse Rock, Rebel Without a Cause, and Blackboard Jungle as essential. Fans of a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll will note that we have covered Blackboard Jungle. We mentioned... No, we didn't really cover... Okay, I was going to say Jailhouse Rock. I don't think I really covered that in the Elvis episodes. I was talking about the John Carpenter one instead. But Girl Can't Help It is coming up in a Little Richard episode sometime soon. Also, Rebel Without a Cause is a great movie. Just not very... I mean, it's rock and roll adjacent. It's important to the culture for teenagers at the time in America and whoever saw it overseas eventually. But you're not going to learn anything about music watching Rebel Without a Cause. You learn a lot about acting, I suppose. Whatever. And even the various films that exist mostly to highlight live performances and exploit what was perceived as a short-lived fad have fine performances wedged in with the less memorable ones. Later fiction films like Ray, about Ray Charles, La Bamba, Richie Valens, and American Hot Wax, Alan Freed, are very true to their subjects, while others push agendas. The Buddy Holly story famously omits Norman Petty entirely and callously misrepresents the Holly family. Or, like Cadillac Records, ostensibly about chess records, warp history to make it more like what Hollywood thinks it should be. Armed with the facts, though, there are moments in all of them that are both relatively accurate and highly entertaining. Cadillac Records we've touched on in the Chuck Berry episode that I did a while back, and there's more to come, including Rock, Rock, Rock and Go Johnny Go, which are both films like he's describing that are there to just sort of show off some live performances, some staged, filmed live performances. One of them has Richie Valens in it. And let's see, it says, in the end, though, this book is about the music and how it came to be made. At the risk of repeating myself, I want you to use it as a springboard to new discoveries, new genres, new performers. Pretty soon you'll be wondering why I haven't mentioned H-Bomb Ferguson or Ronnie Dawson or the Slades. That's when you'll know I've done my job here. Rock and roll is a big world and contains many fascinating histories. Welcome to it. Tell us what you find. Ed Ward, Austin, Texas, November 2016. Chapter 0, In the Beginning. In mid-19th century rural Southern America, which is as good a place as any to start this story, music wasn't something you did. Or, rather, it could have been just one of the things you did, if you did it, like smoking hams, mending the roof and the fences, and hoeing the vegetable patch. Black or white, northern or southern, rural life consisted of one job after another, just to stay alive. Sometimes, particularly among African Americans, music accompanied work, as it also did among sailors or excavating crews. Field haulers may have been African survivals and recordings of prisoners in the fields doing agricultural work, given off with whoops and pieces of melody, sound eerie to our ears. Just double-checked all those words, and yes, I did read them correctly. There's something a little wonky about that sentence, and I don't think I put the accent in the right place, maybe. Field haulers may have been African survivals, comma, and recordings of prisoners in the fields doing agricultural work, giving off with whoops and pieces of melody, sound eerie to our ears. There's something about the first chunk of that not connecting with the second chunk of that. Field hollers may have been African survivals. Maybe a period there? I don't know. Along with chain gang songs and songs laborers sang while laying or mending railroad tracks, this music gave solidarity to groups of people engaged in common work. White rural people, who often lived close to blacks, especially in farming communities, had their own uses for music. Women in particular memorized long, ancient stories in the forms of ballads handed down through the generations and often sang them doing women's work like spinning, weaving, or sewing, or else used them as lullabies. Both groups sang communally in church, and both used instruments for socializing and to play music for dancing. Fiddle, which the whites had brought with them along with a lot of its repertoire from the old country, and which blacks had picked up during slavery from the masters. Banjo, which was based on a West African instrument called the banjar, among many other names, and being easily made from things one had around: wood, hide, gut strings. Caught on right away, and guitar, which being store-bought, was precious, and at least at first not in common use. What's shocking to us these days is the extent to which black string band music from this era, some of which performed by old men, was recorded in the 1930s by the black folklorist John Work. Sounds like white string band music. Poor rural people didn't worry as much about race as they did about survival, and more than one of the early string bands to record in the 1920s was biracial. A good tune was a good tune, and if one group learned it from the other, that was how the process worked. Any variation or change was more likely up to the individual than to a folk tradition. But the important thing was, none of it was professional. It was part of everyday life that existed around events like the annual hog butchering, or the happy event of a friend's visit or a wedding, or simply to blow off steam after a week's work. It was, in the purest sense of the term, folk music. Which isn't to say that America didn't have professional showbiz back then. It was just limited to the cities. Rural people had neither money nor transportation, nor, in most cases, the inclination to engage with the wandering troops of minstrels, light opera singers, and, after 1871, ensembles singing Negro spirituals who descended from the Fisk Jubilee singers. This branch of entertainment was for the middle class and up. It was performed by professionals, people who worked at making their art and were paid for it. And except for providing venues, a template for touring, and a few songs leaking into the folk pool, it doesn't have too much to do with our story, at least not until the very last days of the 1800s when the phonograph was born. The earliest phonographs, once the world adopted Emil Berliner's disc format over Edison's cylinder, and Berliner's standard of playing from the outside in rather than Pathe's inside out, were sturdy furniture. They had to be. The acoustic signal coming off the disc through a steel or cactus thorn needle needed room for amplification in a large chamber, although the fascinated owners still had to sit close to the machine. You couldn't play a record in the next room and expect to hear it. What were people listening to? The kind of music people of their economic class, upper, middle, and above, might be expected to listen to included classics, light classics, operatic arias, songs from the musical theater that was thriving in New York, patriotic music. John Philip Sousa's band was popular, and not just for his famous marches, since he composed other things for them. Comic sketches from the vaudeville stage, often in Jewish, Negro, or Irish dialect, and the occasional novelty, like a Negro Jubilee ensemble singing spirituals, or, even more novel, the Dinwiddle-colored quartet's mashup of Dem Bones with what sounds like a blackface minstrel comedy interlude. Off the record, independent of this mainstream, some major changes were happening. For one thing, medicine shows, a sort of low-rent spin-off, the touring minstrel show, began to appear in rural Southern America, bringing black and white performers, sometimes together, to communities that had never before seen professional entertainers. They'd play and sing and prepare the locals for a pitch for some miracle drug, mostly alcohol with additives that could be anything from opium to gasoline. that would do incredible things and was available just until the caravan pulled out of town for a low, low price. The people who performed at these shows were considered lowlifes by polite society, but out in the boondocks, they were visitors from another world. If the medicine show was from far away, they might well be exposing the locals to instrument styles and even forms of music they'd never heard before. In addition, the better-funded medicine shows handed out singers, cheap booklets with some of the songs performed in the show, thereby spreading everything from Stephen Foster songs to hymns and drinking songs to places where they'd been previously unknown. One singer was found to have had half its contents recorded by one act or another during the 1920s and 30s. The medicine shows lasted almost a century and became laboratories for young musicians honing their performing skills and welcome employment for the entertainers who were too rural for the vaudeville stage. Starting in the very last years of the 19th century, a new musical form emerged out of nowhere in the Deep South. Nobody can pinpoint the place or time when blues was invented, nor does it have a legendary inventor, but it did have a chronicler in the person of W.C. Handy, a trumpet player from Memphis, also a band leader, who was famously waiting for a train in the early days of the 20th century in rural Tutwiler, Mississippi, when a ragged black man with a guitar sat down next to him and, running a knife blade over the strings, began to sing the weirdest music I ever heard, improvising lyrics about the train they were waiting for. Handy went on to make much out of this discovery, even advertising himself as the father of the blues. But blues was an evolution from other black traditions, including the songster genre, which survived in the work of ragtime Texas Henry Thomas, Mississippi John Hurt, and Mance Lipscomb, among others, and is responsible for such black ballads as Frankie and Johnny, Stack Lee, and the Titanic. Blues was actually something new and easy enough to write. In its classic form, the first two lines repeat, then a third line closes the thought. Woke up this morning, blues all around my bed. Woke up this morning, blues all around my bed. I tell you people, they're the worst blues I've ever had. Some blues told stories, advancing the story, usually of heartbreak, verse by verse. Other blues were made up of what were called floating verses, just like the one quoted, or the blues would start with a story and go on to floating verses that fit the mood. Either way, the form had the advantage of having spaces between the lines where an instrumentalist could play some licks, and the space between the verses for more extended solo work. Blues probably started out being accompanied by guitars, which became more available as mail-order sources like Sears, Roebuck and Company, and Montgomery Ward found their way into rural areas. But the form lent itself to the piano, too, which meant that it soon spread to the cities, where blues singers, almost invariably female, wound up on the black vaudeville stages. Gertrude Ma Rainey, one of the first to find fame, was the centerpiece of the Rabbit Foot Minstrels, one of the top black touring outfits, and her influence on younger singers was immense. The rise of urban blues was parallel to, and to some extent, integrated with the rise of the music that came to be called jazz. Although it was undeniably a popular music, far more popular than some of the other music of its time, jazz only concerns us here as an ingredient of other forms. It's worth noting that many jazz scholars consider the blues-singing women of the 1920s as jazz musicians, while ignoring or discounting rural blues performers. Those assholes. Those are my words, not Ed Ward's words. The harmonic structure of blues, however, was with jazz from its very earliest days. And the power of the word is evident in the way songs that aren't blues at all, W.C. Handy's St. Louis Blues, to give a prominent example, use the word if not the form. If blues was a central ingredient to black music in the Deep South, there was another form that arrived about the same time that was just as important on the eastern seaboard. Ragtime. This was a piano-based, composed, and notated, syncopated musical form that came into being simultaneously with the earliest jazz, and in many of the same venues. Ragtime might be what the piano professor was playing in whorehouses with enough class to have a parlor with a piano, but it quickly escaped its seedy origins to become a fad in vaudeville and the politer parlors of the middle class. Most notably, it was promoted by the sheet music publishers who had Scott Joplin, a black pianist with some training, under contract. Joplin was hardly the only ragtime composer to make money for an ambitious publisher, but his prodigious output included music for his small instrumental ensembles and an opera, among other works. And while ragtime wasn't particularly transposable to the guitar, its ideas were. And so guitarists who heard pianists playing a form of ragtime called barrel house in turpentine camps in Georgia tried out the harmonies and came up with intricate finger-picking techniques to form melodies on them, and invented a guitar style that mimicked the multiple lines and tricky rhythms of the piano music. This became the basis of the black, rural, popular music of Georgia and the Carolinas. Another place where ragtime's ideas showed up was in the medicine shows, where comic songs were common. Again, the chord progressions made a great base for a type of music that became known as hokum, which spread to both the black and white traditions. White medicine show performers like Uncle Dave Macon and harmonica Frank Floyd salted their repertoires with hokum, and black performers in Memphis made it a signature of the city's music. As it was largely what the jug bands there played, Gus Cannon of Cannon's Jug Stompers had a long career with the shows, as well as the successful Memphis Sheiks. Not surprisingly, all these groups were in high demand among the city's moneyed whites for party entertainment. These developments happened slowly, but they didn't all happen in the same places at the same time, since there was no mass media even remotely interested in this minority interest stuff. And in some places, they didn't happen at all. But soon after the end of World War I, enough of these new sounds were in evidence for the immense changes that would come in the 1920s, kick off the arrival of a distinctly American wave of music. Let's jump ahead to some Nine Inch Nails, shall we? Here's some stuff I recorded a few weeks ago for the Nine Inch Nails Crow episode that is not even begun now. I had begun it, as far as recording goes, it's been researched for a couple of years, actually. But I finally found more than one book about Nine Inch Nails to pull some information from, and I started finding a lot of old Spin magazines on Google Books with interviews with Trent Reznor that I'll utilize instead of what you're about to hear now. An abject failure on my part to wring any useful information out of this modern-looking publication called like Further Down the Spiral or something like that. I forget. I'll say what it is in the recording coming up. It's something weird. It's something that didn't make sense. It was like Into the Never, which just makes you think of that Metallica song Through the Never. So here's the issue with Nine Inch Nails and books about Nine Inch Nails. Trent Reznor, once he found out he didn't like doing tons of interviews and whoring himself out, and he didn't like talking to journalists, this is my assumption, didn't leave a lot out there for biographers to scavenge. A lot of what I found are longer interviews, tend to be from Musician Magazine or Keyboard Magazine. And when I say found, I mean became aware that they existed, not actually found them. I'm trying real hard on archive.org to find, magazine interviews here and there from 1990, 91, 92, 93. And then in Spin Magazine, the early 90s, there's a few that I'm going to pull from. Now, one of the books I found that just came out a couple years ago is Into the Never, 9 Inch Nails and the Creation of the Downward Spiral. And I'm not bringing it up because it looks like a good resource. I'm bringing it up because it looks like just as poor a resource as the 33 1/3 book I had purchased over a year ago and then quickly returned in 2 days about Pretty Hate Machine. Books like these are opportunities for wanky journalists to get into what they think the meanings are of individual tracks on a very important album. And at its core, nothing wrong with that. But I think they're wanky journalists. I think they're just expanding on their own ideas and interpretations of things with nothing really to back it up except for, I've been flipping through the chapters in this fucking book, and I keep seeing all these like references to other bands, and I see references to other like writers, I'll just flip through a couple pages. Okay. Page 153. Marilyn Manson, that's not Trent Reznor, alluded to the flawed argument of evil as an innate quality in his interview with Chuck Palahniuk. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's the guy that wrote Fight Club. And let's see, they're talking about the shooting. Before the shooting, Harris and Klebold were not yet criminals. Oh, I assume this is the Columbine shooting. He talks about Michael Moore, Bowling for Columbine, 2003. Quotes from Marilyn Manson, 20 years on from Columbine, blah. That's a whole page. Firearms. Okay, I'll go backwards a little bit. Charlton Heston, the NRA. True Romance, Oliver Stone. Nothing about 9 Inch Nails. Cop Killer, Ice-T. A lot of gun. Basically, we're talking about guns in music and modern culture, right? Kurt Cobain. Yeah, gangster rap. That's all from the chapter about Big Man with a Gun. There's a description at the top about the song. There's a paragraph about what the author thinks of the song. All right, fine. I'll flip back a few more pages. 122. Trent Reznor's near teenage cry of "Don't you tell me how I feel" channels millions of disaffected adolescents. Far from being entirely negative, the song is an impassioned plea to be heard, but on their own terms, not to be ignored, written off, scapegoated, or stereotyped. It is reflective of the almost permanently confused state of wanting to be noticed and understood while also pushing the world away. Relevant statement to the theme of the song, right? Then he points to an interview on the next page where Reznor refers to once jokingly making some kind of impact in the world, like shooting a president, which has nothing to do with the song, apparently. This is a surprising popular aspiration that feeds directly into the wider culture of American violence. And that's the author's excuse to then, I'm looking down here, John F. Kennedy, Sharon Tate, Lee Harvey Oswald, John Chapman, Reznor attempting to combat these negative suprematist feelings by expressing the other voice, disrespect, blah, 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 blah. All right, fine. Then nothing about the making of the album, nothing about... So it's a whole... So much of the Downward Spiral, I'm on the Runner chapter now, Living the Lie, page 95. So much of the Downward Spiral deals with things falling apart. We witness the narrator's decline as if in slow motion, equally powerless to stop the downward trend. And the narrator loses control as the songs become darker in tone, but also more broken and diffracted in style and substance. That's great. I fucking love that. Yeah, that's a good observation. I'm digging this. Presenting various aspects of the spiral's descent. Ruiner is perhaps one of the album's most pessimistic songs. Offers an unwinnable war with the Ruiner character, and from this it expresses the narrator's will of resistance as he is caught in a seemingly impossible struggle with himself. Fucking great. Love it. Describing the beginning of the song. The Runers admired as a noble Nietzschean higher being, ruling through force of character. Icarus-style position of flying too close to the sun. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Pet Shop Boy-style sequencer line blurbles through, but is quickly pushed aside. Okay. Cool. No, that's all right. I'm down. Pushed aside by a propulsive drum beat. The thudding kick drum banging on the door of the mind. And then a fierce thrashing breakbeat loop crashes in. Wrestling to hold itself together as the narrator rants accusations behind a haze of distortion. Okay. Now, some of this is evident to anyone who's listening to the sound of the fucking song, though. Right? Right? Like, is this to be put into a pod and sent off to Mars for aliens to read and understand what the downward spiral's about? Like, are we going to put, like, a gramophone in the pod and then a wax cylinder or a disc, a vinyl disc, or whatever? What did they make them out of before vinyl? It was like it was shellac. Reznor's use of sonic scale makes the relatively flat and almost drawled delivery of the chorus lyrics all the more resonant, left to hang in the air and drag at the ear. An article by Kevin Muzilas for the Escapist website 2014. Oh, we're including authors from websites in 2014. Offers a track-by-track explanation of the movie Fight Club. Oh, we're talking about Fight Club now. Under the influence of Downward Spiral, he connects the Ruiner figure in the song with the character of Tyler Durden, the id gone wild person. Oh my God! You could say this about a Gordon Lightfoot song. You could say this about a Sex Pistols song. Jesus. You could say this about an A.A. Milne poem if you wanted to. That's how this kind of writing works. God damn it. Okay. Flipping back to the March of the Pigs, a chapter beginning as a trashy thrash moshing anthem. I mean, thrash, mosh. I'm thinking blast beats on the drum. I'm thinking thrash. Like 1986, 87, brother. Not. It's a wacky fucking dance beat that won't let you dance to it. You know, if you're used to something a little bit more four on the floor. 269 beats per minute drumming in 7/8 time signature is an off-kilter yet taut and precise. Oh, God, these words, these adjectives. Being the fastest song Nine Inch Nails ever recorded, perhaps the most explosive. All right, cool. That's cool. Whatever. Doesn't teach me a lot. The song is an example of shock as musical spectacle, bursts of guitar employed as weapon. Yeah, you could say they were employed as dildos just as easily. It could mean anything. The guitar is employed as a weapon. Yeah, in rock music, especially aggressive, industrial-style rock music. Or heavy metal, or punk. Yes, the guitar is a weapon. The comparison to automatic rifles have been made a million times. The comparisons to dicks have been made a million times. The song's a fantastic paranoid mess. He's surrounded by pig figures, coming at him from every direction, as both gullible victims and demanding aggressors. All right. I think that's relevant. Gullible victims and demanding aggressors. The words like vortex and guitars hammering, broken steps, twisted game show, circus. Okay. He's going into Piggy, the March of the Pigs, a 1995 article from Newsday entitled "The Casualties of Moshing." Knights of Nine Inch Nails and Broken Bones describes the mosh pit in anthropological terms of physical primitivism. Okay, so he's referencing someone else's article in the mid-90s about moshing. And then he goes deeper into that. The author talking about a gig at the New York Nassau Coliseum, people flopping around, a surging mob of people flipping around like rag dolls. Yeah. This was happening all the time in the 90s. People would just think they were very intellectual, just writing about how young people behaved at these kind of rock shows. And it was like really, profound to them. Reznor sees the pigs of his audience adopt a purely physical system, is disciplined and wild, keeping with music marshaling themselves into the mosh pit state. March of the Pigs continues the anthropomorphism of Piggy across the album. Reznor uses the imagery of herd and hive animals. Well, we get that from just fucking listening to the album and listening to the lyrics. Ah, God. All right. Emphasis on bodies in March. Movement suggests a herd of animals. You already said something similar. That's like 3 paragraphs later. March has a Fight Club-like energy with people venting their buried frustrations but performing en masse. How is that a Fight Club-specific energy? That could be so many things. All right. During a break in the Woodstock performance of March of the Pigs, Reznor unambiguously addressed the crowd as all you miserable, muddy fuckheads, followed by the question, doesn't it make you feel better? In an interview, he alluded to developing fan fear and feeling alienated in his role as the supposed leader of the crowds watching the shows, telling Musician magazine in 1994, you're meaning what you're singing and looking down at all these subhuman things going, take a shit on my head, spit on me, anything. That fucks up anybody after a while. Maybe that's mostly in your head, Trent. Maybe they were just like having a great time and, but willing to be miserable during one of your shows. Like we all have at various times, like you probably did at somebody else's show. I don't think that's 50,000 people all saying, take a shit on my face and I'll love it, especially at Woodstock, because, there was other fans of other bands there. Whatever. Then it goes into the pig, a creature of mixed status, valued and derided in equal measure. Their literal fleshiness makes them an easy target for abuse, which is consistent with Downward Spiral's exploration of the body as horror and an object of self-disgust. I think all that, yeah, all right. I'll take that on board, and I think it's relevant. I think it's not inaccurate. Pigs are reduced to swine that consume swill, rotten to the point of compost. They are presented as natural gluttons, eating to the point at which they are stuffed. When starved, the pig can and will consume flesh and bone, human or otherwise, giving rise to the expression, as greedy as a pig. As anyone that's watched Snatch can tell you, that's just that was explained a lot better in a particular scene of that particular crime movie. It's cruel irony then that humans criticize the rotund, porcine frame. The pig's willingness to consume food to the point of excess fatness is the desired outcome of the intensive factory farming techniques. Pigs appear as a drag, a drain, a load, valued for their brute weight as commodity. They are born, that is to say, bred to slaughter. Oxford, They begin and end their lives in a world of victimhood. Theirs is a negative life cycle, as flesh becomes carcass, becomes meat, to be transmuted into product, symbolic of the processes of production and consumption. The meeting of piggish bodies and moshing aligns with the song's image. Jesus Christ. Oh, there's a lustful phallic image of shedding skin or layer. Oh, God, this is so self-important. This dude was so happy with himself when he was fucking typing this. Reznor told Circus Magazine in 1994, when you peel back the skin, sometimes you find that what you see is not always the person you thought you were. This relatable fear of exposure and vulnerability is also expressed in Nirvana's song Lithium. Oh, thanks! In which Kurt Cobain addresses feelings of ugliness and inadequacy, but recognizes that he might well be speaking to the listener as himself. What does this have to do with fucking Nine Inch Nails making a record? Oh, God. The narrator frequently refers to his desire to watch the system being torn down into collapse. Yeah, that's a lot of narrators and a lot of Nine Inch Nails songs. It's hard to know whether this is aimed directly at still-hated Steve Gottlieb and TVT, the record company that kind of screwed over Trent in the beginning before he signed to Interscope. Those are my notes, not the ones in the book. Simply at the music industry at large for their exploitation of artists. Certainly Reznor would later provide his own revolution, founding Nothing Records and establishing his own online distribution. Founding Nothing later? I thought he had Nothing Records when he signed with Interscope. And that was before Broken came out. Might be wrong. If I'm wrong, call in. Sorry. I don't mean to be mean. Adam Steiner, if you're listening to this, please call in and correct me. I'm sorry. I'm being very hard on you, but you're the second of 2 Nine Inch Nails books that are just such a fucking wank fest. This quote from Rolling Stone, not from Trent Reznor, but from the writer from Rolling Stone, Jonathan Gold, about pigs and victims' bodies as food. Oh, God. When asked by NME, okay, so he's quoting, so he's doing an interpretation of what he thinks Nine Inch Nails songs are about, and then he quotes another guy who's giving his interpretation from Rolling Stone, and then he points to an NME article, New Music Express from 1994, about his reference to pigs. Reznor says, I guess I just use that word generically as a metaphor for people I don't like, or myself, or things I don't like. Okay, so that kind of defuses everything that we just sat through, and I didn't even read the whole fucking chapter. There's a lot more to it. All that wankery. So you did all that to leave us with, and Trent Reznor says it really doesn't mean anything specific. Now, if I wanted to make the point that the author was trying to make about pigs and not go off on so many tangents and my own interpretations, I might just read straight from Chapter 3 of God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens. It's entitled A Short Digression on the Pig, or Why Heaven Hates Ham. All religions have a tendency to feature some dietary injunction or prohibition, whether it is the now lapsed Catholic injunction to eat fish on Fridays or the adoration by Hindus of the cow as a consecrated and invulnerable animal. The government of India even offered to import and protect all the cattle facing slaughter as a result of the bovine encephalitic or mad cow plague that swept Europe in the 1990s. Or the refusal by some other Eastern cults to consume any animal flesh or to injure any other creature, be it rat or flea. But the oldest and most tenacious of all fetishes is the hatred and even fear of the pig. It emerged in primitive Judea and was for centuries one of the ways, the other being circumcision, by which Jews could be distinguished. Even though Surah 560 of the Quran condemns particularly Jews, but also other unbelievers, as having been turned into pigs and monkeys, a very intense theme in recent Salafist Muslim preaching, and the Quran describes the flesh of swine as unclean or even abominable, Muslims appear to see nothing ironic in the adoption of this uniquely Jewish taboo. Real horror of the porcine is manifest all over the Islamic world. One good instance would be the continued prohibition of George Orwell's Animal Farm. So far, are you feeling how this, language-wise, flows a little bit more reasonably? Maybe. Because he's not a rock journalist. I'm not going to let this go. You're going to hear me read this part. just to know how much more concise and interesting this language could actually be if you're just going to write about pigs and not sound like a 17-year-old kid. Let's see. Animal Farm, one of the most charming and useful fables of modern times, of the reading of which Muslim school children are deprived. I have perused some of the solemn prohibition orders written by Arab education ministries, which are so stupid that they fail to notice the evil and dictatorial role played by the pigs in the story itself. Orwell actually did dislike pigs as a consequence of his failure as a small farmer. And this revulsion is shared by many adults who have had to work with these difficult animals in agricultural conditions. Crammed together in sties, pigs tend to act swinishly, as it were, and to have noisy and nasty fights. It is not unknown for them to eat their own young and even their own excrement, while their tendency to random and loose gallantry is often painful to the more fastidious eye. But it has often been noticed that pigs, left to their own devices and granted sufficient space, will keep themselves very clean, arrange little bowers, bring up families, and engage in social interaction with other pigs. The creatures also display many signs of intelligence, and it has been calculated that the crucial ratio between brain weight and body weight is almost as high with them as it is in dolphins. There is great adaptability between the pig and its environment, as witness wild boars and feral pigs, as opposed to the placid porkers and frisky piglets of our more immediate experience. But the cloven hoof or trotter became a sign of diabolism to the fearful, and I dare say that it is easy to surmise which came first, the devil or the pig. It would be merely boring and idiotic to wonder how the designer of all things conceived such a versatile creature and then commanded his higher mammal creation to avoid it altogether or risk his eternal displeasure. But many otherwise intelligent mammals believe that heaven hates ham. I hope that you have guessed by now what we know in any case, that this fine beast is one of our fairly close cousins. It shares a great deal of our DNA, and there have lately been welcome transplants of skin, heart valves, and kidneys from pigs to humans. This book came out in the early 2000s, like around 2004, I want to say. If, which I heartily trust does not happen, a new Dr. Moreau could corrupt recent advances in cloning and create a hybrid pig man, widely feared as the most probable outcome. Meanwhile, almost everything about the pig is useful, from its nutritious and delicious meat to its tanned hide for leather and bristles for brushes. In Upton Sinclair's graphic novel of the Chicago slaughterhouse, The Jungle, it is agonizing to read about the way that pigs are borne aloft on hooks, screaming as their throats are cut. Even the strongest nerves of the most hardened workers are shaken by the experience. There is something about that shriek. To press this a little further, one may note that children, if left unmolested by rabbis and imams, are very drawn to pigs, especially to baby ones, and that firefighters in general do not like to eat roast pork or crackling. The barbaric vernacular word for roasted human in New Guinea and elsewhere was long pig. I have never had the relevant, I've never had to read this word out loud before, degestative experience myself, but it seems that we do, if eaten, taste very much like pigs. Now I'll skip ahead a little bit and just read a couple more paragraphs because I think this will be educational about the simultaneous attraction and repulsion derived from an anthropomorphic root. The look of the pig and the taste of the pig and the dying yells of the pig and the evident intelligence of the pig were too uncomfortably reminiscent of the human. Porcophobia and porcophilia thus probably originate in a nighttime of human sacrifice and even cannibalism, at which the holy texts often do more than hint. Nothing optional from homosexuality to adultery is ever made punishable, unless those who do the prohibiting and exact the fierce punishments have a repressed desire to participate. As Shakespeare put it in King Lear, the policeman who lashes the whore has a hot need to use her for the very offense for which he plies the lash. Porcophilia can also be used for oppressive and repressive purposes. In medieval Spain, now this is the part where you'll take away something, hopefully, that you'll remember tomorrow. Remember tomorrow. Very, very boring Iron Maiden song from, I think, the first album. Can be, let's see. Oh, in medieval Spain, where Jews and Muslims were compelled on pain of death and torture to convert to Christianity, the religious authorities quite rightly suspected that many of the conversions were not sincere. Indeed, the Inquisition arose partly from the holy dread that secret infidels were attending Mass, where, of course, and even more disgustingly, they were pretending to eat human flesh and drink human blood in the person of Christ himself. Among the customs that arose in consequence was the offering, at most events formal and informal, of a plate of charcuterie. Those who've been fortunate enough to visit Spain or any good Spanish restaurant will be familiar with the gesture of hospitality. Literally dozens of pieces of differently cured, differently sliced pig. But the grim origin of this lies in a constant effort to sniff out heresy and to be unsmilingly watchful for giveaway expressions of distaste. See that? He wasn't writing about Nine Inch Nails, but I've taken that passage, we tie it into the song Heresy, we tie it in the song March of the Pigs, we could tie it into Piggy if we want to, and we can also tie it into the anti-God sentiments of various Nine Inch Nails songs of the era. Now, am I degrading the work of Adam Steiner for not being Christopher Hitchens? Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Is that justified? No, not at all. Not justified. It's very petty and very mean-spirited. But I saw Mr. Plinkett do it once on a Red Letter Media review where he compared, I think it was Star Wars Attack of the Clones to Citizen Kane in one scene. So that was my moment. That was my I don't know, I would say literary, but it's nonfiction instead of literature. That's my version of my subjugation of that method, I guess, to my own evil ends, my own cheap little attempt to sound clever. But you learn something about the origins of charcuterie. I guess if I'm saying anything, if you love Nine Inch Nails, maybe read the Christopher Hitchens book instead of the Adam Steiner book. Because I keep flipping through it, man, and all I keep finding are mentions of other artists like The Cure, Jesus and Mary Chain, Throbbing Gristle, mentions of so many other like authors, and oh god, I don't see anything in here about the making of the Downward Spiral. It's just a critical interpretation, and not even critical. It's not even analysis. It's just, here's what I noticed about this song on the Downward Spiral, and then here's what other things it makes me think of. Oh, God, you guys. Oh, God. It hurts. It hurts so much. From Altamont by Joel Selvin. Chapter 1, Pipe Dreams. Rock Scully had passed through Heathrow Airport in London many times before. Growing up as the stepson of a respected international scholar and journalist, Scully had spent years living abroad, attending private schools and universities in Europe. He was not especially alarmed to be greeted in the almost friendly official tone of the British passport officer. "Mr. Scully? Right this way, sir." In October 1969, 6 weeks after Woodstock, it had become increasingly common to see visitors to England arrive wearing long hair and hippie garb. But Scully, the 24-year-old manager of the Grateful Dead, ringleader of the most resolute gang of San Francisco freaks, houseband to the dawning of the LSD apocalypse and pioneer explorers of inner space, was a prince among California hippies and looked it. Scully appeared like nothing so much as Rasputin, his scarecrow frame topped with scraggly dark hair and an unkempt wispy beard. He had taken so much LSD, his pupils were little more than molten brown orbs floating in buttermilk. He was dressed head to toe in... Oh, the pages. Oh, God damn it. Oh, in denim. See, that's the extra. The extra humanity you get on this version of the show, the Patreon version. No edits there. I'm too lazy right now. Too much reading to do. His feet encased in exquisite hand-tooled cowboy boots. He had the odd feeling he had been expected. Rock had arrived with Frankie Weir, the formidable girlfriend of dead guitarist Bobby Weir, close enough to him to have assumed his last name, who was headed to London to take a job with Derek Taylor, press secretary for the Beatles and Apple Records. It was only on the flight to England that Rock realized that his ticket, which had been arranged for him by Lenny Hart, father of Dead drummer Mickey Hart, who had recently taken over some management responsibilities in regard to the Dead's business affairs, was one way. That struck him as odd. So did a lot of things, and he put it out of his mind. Rock had their ticket stubs in his pocket. Rock was coming to London to show the Brits how real San Francisco hippies threw free concerts in the park. He was to meet with a production company called Black Hill Enterprises, which only 3 months before had presented a huge free concert in London's Hyde Park with the Rolling Stones. The company had invited Scully to meet with them to discuss similar possible concerts with the Dead and Jefferson Airplane, the other leading San Francisco hippie rock band. The Dead and the airplane were closely associated, and Scully had gone to the airport straight from a meeting at the Airplane Mansion in San Francisco to discuss the prospect of the London concerts. In addition to talking business, Airplane guitarist Paul Kantner had handed Rock a small, brown vial filled with pure Merck pharmaceutical cocaine. Scully tucked the vial in his pants pocket and headed for London. The passport official took Rock upstairs and showed him to a small room in Heathrow where 2 customs officers waited. One of the agents had a newspaper clipping with the headline about the Grateful Dead planning an LSD fest in Hyde Park. They started to paw through Rock's luggage. The first thing that came to their attention was Rock's mojo, the eagle feather and bear claw, and other Native American artifacts that he routinely traveled with. He had also loaded up on turquoise jewelry and bracelets that he knew the English would love. But when they picked up the Polaroid film canister and shook it, dozens of tiny purple pills fell out and rolled all over the floor. It was the finest LSD in the world. Owsley Purple, manufactured by Augustus Owsley Stanley III himself, longtime benefactor, resident audio genius, and elixir mixer to the court of the Grateful Dead, the first private party in the world to synthesize the mind-altering compound. More worried about the marijuana in his luggage, Rock had practically forgotten about the LSD. It wasn't a lot of doses, maybe 50 or 60. The small pills resembled the tiny jacks of heroin dispensed to addicts in England. "What's this, morphine?" said the customs agent. 2 men whisked Rock away by his arms into an interrogation room, and he was quickly stripped to his boxer shorts. The younger man started thoroughly going through Rock's pants while the older agent played with the bear claw and the feather, fascinated by the exotic Americana. Then he pulled out another bottle of pills, Rock's enteroviaform, diarrhea medicine. The older agent recognized the prescription. "Do you have a problem?" he asked. "Yes, I do," said Scully, "and I actually need to go to the bathroom right now." He reached out and snatched his pants, clutched his stomach, and was led out of the room by the younger agent to a small bathroom. The agent let Rock inside, who closed and locked the door behind him and retrieved the vial of cocaine from the pants watch pocket. The watch pocket is where most of us keep our guitar picks. With one massive snort, like that wasn't put there by the Levi Strauss Company for our guitar picks. Just so you know, folks. With one massive snort, he inhaled the contents. He pulled out the Frankie's ticket stub, tore it into pieces, and flushed it down the toilet. Without that, there was no way the authorities could connect them. He rinsed the empty brown vial in the sink and put it back in his pants pocket. Outside, the younger agent wanted to take him to yet another room where now the police wanted to talk with him. They sat him down and started asking questions, but Scully couldn't speak. The cocaine had completely frozen his larynx. Larynx? I've heard it pronounced both ways. Best he could manage was some distressed, garbled squawks. They arrested Rock for importing a controlled substance and took him to the Feltham police station, a small jail in a remote London borough adjacent to Heathrow, largely used for airport arrests. And as a result, a tidy, welcoming neighborhood establishment that did not truck with the usual criminal element, but attracted a higher-class clientele. They served Rock tea and left his cell door open, even took him with them when they went on their rounds. He passed the weekend pleasantly enough in custody. Frankie Weir went to town and worked the phones, beginning a long trail of calls. She raised bail from Lenny Holzer, a New York scenester who was living in London and at the Dorchester Hotel, and had first met Rock years before when the Dead played the roof of the Chelsea Hotel. Frankie also called the Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards and Sam Cutler of Black Hill Enterprises, the rogue concert producer who'd invited Rock over in the first place. In turn, Cutler contacted Chelsea Milliken, who was running Epic Records in England at the time, consulting with Rock about landing a record deal for the Dead with the mighty CBS Records. Milliken then phoned home to Marin County, California, and spoke with Rock's new girlfriend, Nikki Rudolph, who flew to the rescue. With money suddenly needed for Rock's legal defense, Nikki arrived in England the next day, 4.5 months pregnant, her bra filled with thousands of hits of acid. The English had little or no access to this quality product, and the California contraband disappeared in one smooth transaction. On Monday, with Holzer's money in his pocket, Milliken picked up Cutler in his well-worn Bentley and drove it to the police station to fetch Rock. Smoking a joint and chatting about Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones guitarist who had drowned in his swimming pool that July, only a few days after being fired from the band. They took Rock by Keith Richards' place on Cheney Walk, I don't know, Cheyne, Cheyne, in Chelsea to pick up keys for a flat Milliken had arranged for Rock, a giant Victorian home nearby with a grand staircase in the middle, sometimes inhabited by members of the Pink Floyd crew and shared by a pair of blonde Scandinavian hookers. But when Richards learned that Rock had left high-grade California marijuana in his unclaimed luggage back at Heathrow, he insisted that Rock go pick it up immediately. Wrapped in tinfoil, the weed was concealed in large, star-shaped Christmas candles. Big Sur bud, unknown to England. Inside the candles were branches containing fat clumps of sinsemilla, a new wrinkle in marijuana cultivation, and a great leap forward, female plants deprived of male companionship that produced rich, fragrant, especially potent flowers with no seeds. A botanical miracle fresh from the greenhouses of enterprising, imaginative California pot growers, and a wonder from the New World on the other side of the Atlantic. The marijuana was something that Richards was adamant could not be left behind. With some reasonable trepidation, he was fresh from the weekend in jail. Scott dressed in a suit and tie and took a cab back to the airport. He had himself dropped off at the underpass that leads to Heathrow and waltzed into the cavernous arrivals hall. He had no passport. They had taken it when they arrested him. And he had no claim checks. But there was his luggage sitting there waiting. He picked up the bags, walked outside, and hailed a cab. That night, he took the pot over to Keith Richards. The Rolling Stones were coming out of a long, dark period, and Scully's fresh West Coast pot was just the beginning of daylight. The band had not been seen much in public for the past 3 years. The rock scene was a different world, and the Stones were unsure of their position in the altered landscape. They were currently planning their first U.S. tour since 1966, back when the Dead and the Airplane weren't known outside a few neighborhoods of San Francisco. Now these San Francisco bands were leaders of the new rock movement, and Scully was an esteemed emissary from the faraway land of California. In London, rock was like Marco Polo returned from the Orient, bearing precious jewels. In the years since 1966, the fashion-conscious English pop scene had become transformed by West Coast psychedelic rock. Although British impressions of what that was were formed largely by speculation and inference. LSD itself was rare in the UK. Members of Pink Floyd, for instance, had built England's top psychedelic band without the benefit of having actually taken LSD. Vocalist Syd Barrett was the sole exception. The English rock poster artists imitated what they saw from San Francisco. The culture was being passed around on scraps of paper. In England, they were adopting new traditions they had heard about but didn't entirely understand, like the free concerts in the park. In San Francisco, free outdoor concerts had been a fixture since the start of the rock scene. The whole Haight-Ashbury rock world sprung up in a neighborhood adjacent to the enormous Golden Gate Park and bordered by a block-wide median called the Panhandle that extended several blocks from the park. While Golden Gate's meadows sometimes held larger, more formal gatherings, it was the Panhandle where the impromptu performances by neighborhood rock bands had the hippie girls dancing barefoot in the park. Jefferson Airplane, The Dead, and Big Brother and the Holding Company all lived within blocks of each other and routinely threw unscheduled shows in the grassy, tree-studded strip. One Sunday afternoon in June 1967, Jimi Hendrix played in the Panhandle for a crowd of a few hundred on a flatbed truck that belonged to the Airplane. When the Dead had moved out of the Haight in March 1968, the band simply pulled up 2 flatbeds into an intersection and blocked traffic for hours while crowds filled Haight Street for blocks. The Dead played all afternoon, running extension cords out of nearby apartment windows for power, and the police stood by helpless, the entire neighborhood overrun. Over the years, bands like The Dead and the Airplane, who also enjoyed giving unplanned shows in the sunshine, had developed careful strategies for dealing with or evading the rules and regulations of the powers that be, but it was almost always a stealthy operation carried off with an outlaw sensibility. Word of this new movement spread around the rock scene in the United States, eventually finding its way across the Atlantic and beginning to influence the musicians and rock scene there. In London, Black Hill Enterprises, the managers of Pink Floyd, had thrown the first large free concert in Hyde Park in June '68 called Midsummer High Weekend. The show featured Roy Harper, Jethro Tull, Tyrannosaurus Rex, and Pink Floyd. As the headliner of the event, Pink Floyd was introducing a new guitarist, David Gilmour, who was replacing founding member Barrett, and celebrating the release of the band's second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets. I had to pause for a second and refill my beverage, get up, looked at Instagram. My old childhood friend Reed Roberts posted a picture of him and his buddies after a soccer game with the Melvins Revolve, I guess, attached to the image. Made me feel good. Ah, yes. Yes. Let the evil flow through you. Ah. Perfect song. Let's see. We're talking about the English version of the free concerts in the park, and the Saucer Full of Secrets coming out. The following year, Black Hill was again enlisted to make the public debut of the new band formed by Eric Clapton after Cream had broken up. After Eric Clapton stopped trying to keep Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce from strangling each other and tried to escape into a band with Stevie Winwood. Unfortunately, Stevie Winwood was naive enough to allow Jack Baker to join that band, even though Eric didn't want him to. But Eric was too much of a puss to make it explicitly clear with everyone that he did not ever want to play with Ginger Baker again, for God's sake. If you can't tell, that's not part of the text. The Black Hill Fellows convinced the new band's powerful manager to pay them for the stage. Pay for them to stage a free concert in London's Hyde Park for the first show by the group named, with some irony, Blind Faith. Along with Clapton, the band included his former Cream mate, Ginger Baker, and vocalist Steve Winwood of Traffic, along with lesser light Rich Gritch on... What does that mean? Lesser light? Like a lesser traffic light? Joel Selvin, you've got some answering to do. You got some explaining to do. Lesser light Rick Gresh on bass. Whatever. The uneventful concert, and maybe if I was a teenager in 1969 and I was reading this today, that would make sense to me, or it would be hilarious, or I would get the reference. I don't know. The concert was a landmark London cultural occasion. Let's see. It drew more than 100,000 people who actually stayed peaceful, listened to the music, had a good time. No big whoop for the cops to deal with. Backstage, people like Paul McCartney and Donovan came out to enjoy the day. Mick Jagger and his girlfriend Marianne Faithfull took a full inspection tour of the production. Shortly after the successful event, the Stones' office contacted Black Hill about producing another free concert in the park the next month. Oh, geez, that's quick. That's fast turnaround. Scheduled for early July 1969, the Hyde Park Rolling Stones show was originally planned to pull back the curtain on the new era for the band, introducing new member Mick Taylor on guitar, celebrating the band's recent hit, Honky Tonk Women, and staking their claim to a post in the rapidly evolving rock world. All that changed when, 2 days before the concert, the guitarist whom Taylor had replaced, founding member Brian Jones, died under suspicious circumstances, drowned in his swimming pool in his home in the English countryside. In an instant, the Hyde Park concert became a memorial. Dressed in a white tunic, Jagger had the impossible task of quieting down the crowd at the start so they could read some unfathomably pathetic, that's with a B, romantic poetry by Shelley, another tragic young Brit killed through misadventure. He is not dead, he doth not sleep, he hath awakened from the dream of life. At the end, white butterflies brought in for the occasion were freed from their boxes, many of which had already suffocated. The butterflies, not the boxes. And what few remained expanded their last breaths, escaping captivity, only to expire in midair above the band. Their carcasses littered the stage. Jesus Christ. The Stones, who had not performed in public since a European tour in the spring of '67, So that's 2 years out of the spotlight on stage anyways. Went on to put on one of the worst shows in the band's history. Rusty, sloppy, ill-rehearsed, guitars out of tune. The crowd didn't care. The huge audience had a great time. There were no arrests, and afterward, everybody who stayed to help clean up was given a copy of the new Rolling Stones single. They left the park immaculate. That's clever. If you got the money for it, that's a good idea. Also, following the model of the West Coast free concerts they had heard about, read about, and seen pictures of without having actually attended, the concert producers used members of the Hells Angels Biker Club as security guards. These British bikers fancied themselves overseas cousins of the real-life California ass-kickers, but they were nothing like that. They hung around the stage, drinking tea, wearing old Nazi helmets and swastikas, but left the security work to the police. These were pretend Hells Angels. Their club had no official connection with the California-based organization. They stood around backstage and looked colorful, but they served no genuine purpose and were nothing like the real thing. These candy-ass imitations had their colors drawn on their motorcycle jackets in chalk, for Christ's sake. Even the worldly Keith Richards knew little about the new San Francisco scene beyond what he had read in Rolling Stone magazine the night Rock Scully and his girlfriend showed up with the Christmas candles from his suitcase. Sitting around a Moroccan hammered copper coffee table in the low light of a brass Arabian table lamp, Rock broke open the candles and extracted the bright green, sticky clumps of marijuana that smoked with a fresh, fruity flavor, almost like tropical lawn clippings. Rock spun golden tales of life in the Wild West, better living through chemistry, a land beyond the sea, with rock and roll in the parks and magical marijuana growing in the woods. Richards was intrigued. Rock was deftly verbal. Someone whose ability to articulate the inexplicable marked him for leadership in a group as innately subversive as the Grateful Dead. Pot, the hash, London, the late night cross-cultural summit meeting. Rock was on a roll. He began to envision the Rolling Stones playing for free in Golden Gate Park. He told Richards he knew how to do it. It would be simple. They would arrange the proper permits, the city, to throw a concert in one of the meadows under the name of the Dead or the Airplane and spring the Stones on the unsuspecting public and Parks Department as a surprise guest. It would make a perfect ending to the big American tour the band was planning, he said. Dreams filled the room. The Stones at Stonehenge, the Taj Mahal, the Hyde Park concert was just the beginning. Much laughter, much smoke. Sometime in the middle of the night, Keith ground up a Nembutal and passed the plate to Rock, who took a healthy honk before realizing it wasn't cocaine. Later in the sleepy early hours, Rock and Nicky staggered back to their flat in foggy Chelsea in the morning. The 2 weeks before Rock's hearing flew by, and Nicky's estranged husband, Ken Connell, known as Goldfinger, found them. He was an international drug smuggler who had lost a hand to an airplane propeller. He was in town with a girlfriend and simply showed up in a white silk suit and a hook for his left hand, looking dapper and dangerous. Goldfinger was crazy, and he harbored dark and violent fantasies toward his ex-wife. Rock and Nicky met him at the Chelsea Tea House, where he tried to kidnap Nicky. But more than the drug charges Rock faced or the ominous presence of Goldfinger, what threw him into a panic in London was a casual conversation he happened to have with Joe Smith, vice president of Warner Brothers Records, whom Rock ran into while visiting the company's London office. Smith congratulated Rock on the band's new contract with the company. Rock went into shock. While he was out of the country, Lenny Hart had conspired behind his back to re-sign the band to Warner Brothers. Lenny had convinced the band to sign the papers backstage at a San Jose concert and told them the $75,000 advance would go to their tax obligations. Halfway around the world, Rock was frantic. Lenny had deliberately waited until he was out of town to pull this off. Did it explain the one-way ticket? Rock had been only that week laying plans with Chelsea Milliken to sign the band to Columbia Records for big money. He saw that the situation had veered disastrously out of his control, and he needed to rush back to Marion County to find out what was happening. Jesus Christ. By the time Rock went to his hearing and was ordered deported, he couldn't wait to get out of England and back to the Dead. In his hurry, he had almost forgotten about telling Keith Richards he could fix it for the Rolling Stones to play a free concert in Golden Gate Park. And that's the end of Chapter 1, where we will leave it for now. I promise you will hear more. In the future! Future events such as these will affect you in the future. take a moment to say thanks for being here and just listening to this kind of stuff. I mean, realize that when I'm on Twitter, I see things pushed into my feed, like something I just saw today. Metallica unleashed Master of Puppets on this day in 1986. Here's 10 reasons why it rips, as chosen by yours truly. Like, does anybody need that? Does anybody need another article praising one of the greatest albums ever made by probably the greatest heavy metal band ever? I mean, we could fight about those terms, sure, but a whole article published as to why Metallica's Master of Puppets is so damn good. And click on the article, like, it's Kirk Hammett's favorite Metallica album. Yeah, it's everyone's favorite Metallica album, with very few exceptions. Master of Puppets, all killer, no filler. Sum 41 stole the show at the 2003 MTV Icon Metallica program with a 3-song medley that included Master of Puppets. Yeah, the singer didn't know the lyrics to the song very well either. I remember that. I remember Korn stealing the show with their cover of One. They had the most original take on anything. Of course, they weren't a good enough band of people that they could actually perform the whole song. They did, like a half as long version of the tune. The MTV Icon special was, I think, justifiably the last one they did, right? Because they had Aerosmith and Janet Jackson and then Metallica, and the Metallica one sucked really bad because there was nobody out there in the MTV era that MTV was trying to promote that could really pull off anything that interesting for a Metallica cover. Good Lord. Oh, Jesus Christ. It boasts Metallica's most definitive song. Yeah, okay. What else? Oh my God. It gave us our first James Hetfield solo. It offered a masterclass in sequencing. It indulged in immersive storytelling. All right, so this is, I don't know, this is for babies, I guess. I guess that's what this is. This is like if you don't know anything about Metallica, or you don't like them, but you haven't heard all their records, but you like them enough to be curious enough to click on this article. I don't know. But at least I'll say this. At least it's a legitimately natural sounding and accurate title of the article. It's not clickbait. It's not bullshit. It's someone writing their pitch, right? I mean, it just reads like a high school kid from debate class or whatever was given an assignment, but it's genuine. It's no hack job, and it's not misleading in its approach. And I say that because just the other day, while I was dreaming up sort of plans for this episode of what I was going to read and what I was going to talk about, I was at the grocery store, and I heard a horrible Ace of Base song from like my senior year of high school, All That She Wants. The one with that stupid keyboard honking Canada Goose noise. And I remember hearing the song as a teen and thinking, all that she wants is another baby. She's gone tomorrow, but all that she wants. This is about a girl that wants to get pregnant. She just wants another kid. She, for whatever reason, like maybe she's making some unhealthy decisions, or she's trying to keep a man around, that she's scared of letting him go. So she's going to do everything she can to get pregnant and have unprotected sex, whatever. And then I thought, no, that's too, well, what we say today that's too on the nose, right? It's too obvious. I mean, we didn't have that phrase in 1995, 96, but we're thinking, no, Jay, you're being stupid. It's just pop music. They're just saying she wants a baby, as in a romantic partner, baby, like, hey, baby, let's dance. Hey, baby, let's spend the night. That kind of a baby. I was like, well, they're like a Scandinavian band of some kind, like, are they Swedish or something like that? Maybe English isn't their first language, and they like, pop music in the English speaking countries, you have to say baby for lover or whatever. That's what I thought. I put that much thought into just the first listen of that song that was foisted on me by pop radio in the 90s. And I probably saw the video on MTV at that point. I didn't think much about it. And many, many years later, I'd say about 5 years ago, there was a video on YouTube like about the real meaning of the song. And it sort of did a little backstory dive into one of the members of Ace of Base, this fucking shitty pop group from, I think they're from wherever ABBA's from. I think maybe they're Swedish, some Nordic place where, you know, they all have the same jawline and they all have the same cheekbones. And to lots of us, that's pretty nice to look at. But it's because they haven't done a lot of interbreeding with a lot of other ethnicities that they all have that same look for generations and generations and generations. And not saying that's all my jam, but that's a pretty good, you know, those are nice aesthetics to gaze upon when you're a teenager. But you know, also, so were the cast of the ladies on A Different World and Head of the Class and other things I grew up with that featured a much more ethnically diverse group of young ladies. What point I'm getting to is one of the douchebag guys in Ace of Base that just sort of stands behind the two women, I think, and plays keyboards or programs the drums, apparently had a background in some very, like, what we would refer to as right-wing, ethnically exclusive movements up there in the Great White North of Europe, and had ties to very anti-Jewish, anti-immigrant propaganda and furthering it. And then the video goes into the fact that, like, the All That She Wants video actually focuses on the main character in the dramatization, a young woman who is seen, you know, clutching at and fiddling with her Star of David necklace. It was quite directly a call out of Jewish people or immigrants that were trying to have like anchor babies, you know, to use a very vulgar modern American term, this is a woman who's trying to infiltrate our society by having children, you know, breeding with one of, this is all implied. This is not obviously laid out in the lyrics. They're trying to breed with our pure blood people and stay in our country, you know, by using these, you know, dangerous loopholes that let interlopers come in and poison our society. And the clickbait headline for this YouTube video, which is the point I'm getting to, because my point is, okay, the Master of Puppets article is silly in its approach, but then again, I'm old and bitter and cynical, and maybe I should just lighten up a little bit, and everyone's got to make a living here anyways. And if this can get through and it's at least honest in its title, then I shouldn't be so annoyed by it. Compared to this YouTube video that was like Ace of Base, how one pop group sold an entire generation on white supremacy. Like, no American suburban kid listened to Ace of Base and decided, oh, that's it. That's my calling. I'm a Nazi now. It wasn't clear that's what the song was about. You would have had to infer a lot based on the symbolism of the video and some of the lyrics. But in America, I think I speak for most of us my age, when you heard something from a Northern European band and you knew that's where they were from, and you heard the way they sang, you know, they're sort of not quite, they don't sound quite German, but they're not Eastern European either. And I'm not doing a good accent. Because I don't even know what their accent is. I'll tell you that. Because we don't care. We don't get enough of it over here. So we just kind of hear those things in their lyrics that are ambiguous to us, and we just go, meh, whatever. It's like they don't know what they're actually saying. So that sentiment doesn't take hold in the American brain. It just doesn't when it's presented in that way. It takes hold when it's a fucking hardcore band, you know, that is explicitly saying really nasty shit about minorities, you know, ethnic or sexual, or otherwise in the community and what needs to be done to them. That's where it takes hold. The subtlety in the symbolism of all that she wants was not anywhere close to what would be needed to convert a generation of teenagers to white supremacy. I do love that message was promoted by a group whose first big hit in America was the chorus of "Life is demanding without understanding, except for the Jews. Only people with high cheekbones and upturned noses and blonde hair." Well, I was recently going through Spin Magazine articles from the early 1990s doing research for Nine Inch Nails and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I ran across this little clip of a review of Schoolie D's Am I Black Enough for You? RCA Records in June of that year. And I clipped it out just for reference later. I was going to get back to it. And I know Schoolie D only because I watched Aqua Teen Hunger Force in the early 2000s. And I listened to Primus. And Primus has a song called Herald of the Rocks, where he mentions going out to see a Schoolie D gig. And I knew he must be important because I've never heard his music, but he's been name-checked a few times in the culture as someone who was a sort of a member of the foundation, right, of what early to mid hip-hop sort of was before gangster rap. And it turns out that, he's the guy that Ice-T gives all the credit to for really being the prototypical gangster rapper, the delivery style and all that stuff. But when I listen to just what little I have so far, it sits pretty nicely in the vein of the like mid-'80s stuff. It's just not as slick. Maybe like Too Short to one degree, the more extreme, edgy, sort of vulgar stuff. And then maybe if Schoolie D had become more, I don't know, commercial, it would have been more along the lines of Tone Loc. I mean, the song I listened to today, Saturday Night, it's one of those like multi-story rap songs from the 80s where it's just like crazy shit happening on the weekends when you're going out to party, like My Posse's on Broadway by Sir Mix-a-Lot, is one that we grew up with around here, especially in the Seattle area. But it's, it's a lot dirtier, and it's got another one of those. That's just like Tone Loc's Wild Thing. There's that one story. I guess I would compare it to that because there's like three different stories, I think, in Wild Thing and Funky Cole Medina, like three different situations. And in this case, just like in Wild Thing, there's like a chick he's trying to get it on with. It turns out to be a dude. I don't know what was going on in the hip hop community in the 80s, but that seems to happen from time to time to these guys. I don't know what it is about them that they can't quite figure that stuff out, or I don't know why there's so much going on there. I have a feeling that in the glam community, in the gay cross-dressing sort of scene, in sort of punk rock and glitter rock and things like that, it was a little bit more out there in the open, and so there wasn't a whole lot of mistakes being made when it came to assuming someone's genetic gender. But I mean, even today, with all the benefits of modern technology and surgery and makeup tutorials and the availability of all that, free form exchange of information and culture, I see people that I could usually you could tell, doesn't give me pause. It's like doing good. You're doing good at what you're doing. I couldn't pull that off. Good for you. But if you know what I'm saying. But the other interesting fact I learned today is that in November 2006, Schoolie D and Cartoon Network were sued over the Aqua Teen Hunger Force theme music. So the guys, the animators that created Aqua Teen, Like they used to work on Space Ghost Coast to Coast and some other stuff. And one of the dudes that was I think he was an animator and a voice artist. He specifically wanted Schooly D. He said, I wanted the guy that scared the shit out of white people back in the day. And so he brings him in, he has him sing and rap the theme song and also do some sort of interstitial voiceover narration. So so when there's like scene changes, you'd hear this sort of like, hey, Frylock, things are going crazy. Whatever. Like Santa Claus got balls and jaws in his drawers or whatever. That's some off kilter thing. So there's a drummer by the name of Terrence Yervais. He claimed he had also written the theme music alongside Schooly D in 1999 while working at the Meat Locker studio. Yervais was aware the song would be used for a television series, but did not approve of it being used for Aqua Teen Hunger Force. However, did not file a copyright to the Library of Congress until May 2006. So this is like 5-6 months before the suit. After the series' fourth season had already started airing. In the lawsuit, Yervais demanded he receive $150,000 for every time the series was ever aired after the lawsuit was filed. He also demanded that all existing copies of the series DVDs be impounded and for Aqua Teen Hunger Force to cease broadcast. And then that made me think, hey, I've got this book called Hip Hop America by Nelson George, who is pretty well respected in the field of R&B and hip-hop journalism and scholaristicness. And I had read some good reviews about his writing and grabbed a couple of his books for future episodes that I had planned to do and haven't gotten to yet. So now I can finally pay off at least a little bit of the price of the book that I paid. And because I went to the index and I looked up Schooly D, and there's a couple mentions of him on 2 pages. So this section is called Criminal Minded. Whenever people rail about the evils of gangster rap, my mind floats back to a particular record and an interview that never happened. In 1985, New York's Kiss FM had a Friday night rap show. I'd either write with it on in the background or lie in bed listening. However, every week, there was one record that stubbornly refused to be background music. Whenever the station played Schooly D's PSK, What Does It Mean?, the mood of my night changed. A first-person narrative about being a vicious stick-up kid and a member of PSK, Parkside Killers, in Philadelphia, it wasn't just Schooly D's words that got me. His cold-blooded delivery and the bracing, taunting track always chilled me. The intensity of my reaction to PSK had been matched by only 2 other listening experiences. Hearing Robert Johnson's Devilish Delta Blues for the first time, woo! And experiencing Tricky's dense pre-millennium dread at a New York concert in 1997. Though as an artist, Schooly D is not at the same level as the legendary Johnson or the innovative hip-hop pioneer Tricky, or trip-hop, excuse me. This is what you get when I'm sight reading. Sorry, folks. This is what you get when I'm just cracking open an author's work for the first time and I'm not used to his cadence and I haven't scanned ahead. But, it's a Sunday morning and I should be at the gym right now. But I'm doing this instead. Let's see. The Philly homeboy channeled something tortured and warped when he laid down PSK. When I hear people talk of being repulsed by gangster rap's cartoony brutality, I understand it by invoking the unease PSK induced in me. Back in that more innocent age, Schooly D's non-judgmental attitude towards violence, as opposed to the cautionary tale of the message, which is Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes you wonder how to keep from going under. Da, 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 ha, 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 ha. You've probably heard it, or you've heard it sampled. But it's like one of those. That's one of those hip hop songs that like I heard in school, in a social studies class when it was like during Black History Month, and it's always, and we're talking 1991 or something, 92. So, and that was like early 80s, late 70s. But that's always the one that they would put on documentaries and stuff. Especially if it was about the 80s or Reagan era or the origins of hip hop and basically it's like the first rap songs people ever heard. So let's see. So his non-judgmental attitude toward violence was unusual and even shocking, which I think is why it probably was effective. That's why a lot of good, music is effective when it portrays, I don't know, uncomfortable situations or uncomfortable aspects of humanity. sociology, whatever, politics, or just economic, damage or war or violence. You don't need to comment on it, to have an impact. It's more impactful if you're not commenting, quite frankly. Like the Jim Carroll Band's People Who Have Died is an amazing, amazing collection of short life stories. And you can tell he's upset that these people are dead. You don't need him to say, and I disapprove of suicide in young people, whatever. That makes it less effective. It makes it agenda driven. Anyway, it says my second early gangster memory involves, I'm wondering if this is are we done with Schoolie D for this part? Or are we moving on to Boogie Down Productions? Criminal Minded, Cool G, Easy E, KRS-One. Yeah, it looks like that's it for Schoolie D. So if I keep going, then I'm going to have to read like the next 4 pages. And it's not about Schoolie D anyways. So there we go for now. Go listen to some Schoolie D now. Or go listen to some Primus. How? Oh, and speaking of preachy, something I left out, unfortunately, from the heavy metal episode, I should have added. I found it in my sort of research, but I neglected to make enough notes about it to include while I was recording the bits about the movie. There was an attempt by my hero, Robert Rodriguez, to make a new heavy metal film. I think in the last 10 years, the rights to it changed hands a few times, the rights to make a movie. And Rodriguez was going to do it at some point and tried to get it done, failed, I guess. I don't know the extenuating circumstances. I don't know why it was not successful as an endeavor to bring it to the big screen or bring it to, a streaming service as a film. But what he had planned did get made into the short miniseries Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix. And I went and checked it out this morning, put on the first episode about 3 robots that come to, the planet Earth after the apocalypse. And it sucked. I mean, it was well made. It was animated. And it was cute, but it was real preachy. It was real smarmy, and it's just because I'm old probably, and I grew up with a lot of this stuff in the 80s and 90s, like so much of this self-aware winking at the audience, like people are really bad, okay? How come these people died this way? It's just, and it was very, very left wing. And hey, I'm practically a Marxist compared to, my family and some of my peers. They probably think I'm a card-carrying socialist or something. Compared to my actual Marxist friends, I'm like Ronald Reagan. So if that tells you anything, I don't think that makes me a centrist either, because that whole title's up for grabs as well. But I guess I don't want to get too into politics because it's always the landscape's always shifting, and it's not my goal here to express myself that way through a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. I think you'll pick up on what my politics are well enough as time goes on, if you haven't already. And it's just I can't stand the last 5 years of people ostensibly on my own side that I refuse to wave that flag, but I think the values are basically the same. Just being so incredibly obvious and smarmy about the other side being wrong. And I don't know, it just fills me with ick. It's like, you guys are not doing it's just like the fact that I grew up with guns, and I'm comfortable around guns. I haven't shot a gun in many, 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 many years. I refuse to pay for the privilege of putting paper holes in things putting holes in paper targets, the amount of, I refuse to I refuse to pay for a device and the ammunition and the time and the space at a range to go put holes in a piece of paper or whatever. It's very silly to me. And if someone's going to break into my place to like molest me or murder me and steal my shit, like they've got a better plan for their life than I do. And I probably have no way to stop them except for a little bit of martial arts that I totally suck at, and a little bit of boxing that I totally suck at. Anyhow, the hearing people on ostensibly they're on your side, that's a word I've never looked up the definition for, but I sure do seem to like using it today. And just hearing them make the worst arguments that aren't helping anybody is and it's nauseating. And that's my point with the gun thing is. The gun thing is I'm comfortable with guns. I grew up around guns. I don't have a burning passion to campaign for the individual handgun owner or shotgun owner's rights to own those things to be taken away. But I think all their arguments are terrible. Like the gun arguments suck really bad. They're just full of paranoia and bitching and moaning about things that haven't even happened and aren't happening. No one's rounding them up. And the way that they feed off of tragedy, it creeps me out every time another school gets shot up or whatever. But you don't need me to talk about that. You hear enough about it all the time. And the original point was, I don't know if I'm going to watch the rest of Love, Death, and Robots just because if you're going to lead with something that was so like, we get it. Okay, we get it. You disapprove of humanity and you disapprove of, the way that certain people live their lives. And, yes, wealth and income inequality is bad and it is destroying us. I agree, but there's got to be a better way to satirize it than this. And then the twist ending is really fucking dumb and looked like they find out that some element of life on Earth made it to Mars because there's no life on Earth anymore. That is maybe not some plant-based life. And they go, oh, like these 3 robots that are investigating. Oh, let's find out what species it was. And then it cuts to Mars, and then there's a reveal of what species it is. But it can speak English because it looks directly in the camera and says, "You weren't expecting Elon Musk, were you?" Like that's so not a dunk on Elon Musk, and I hate Elon Musk. Anyhow, that's the coda. That's the epilogue to the whole heavy metal film story so far. I don't know. Maybe I'll check out some better episodes. Maybe I'll read some reviews of what the good episodes were because that one really put me off. And again, if it's on Netflix, I don't know. You can get away with more, obviously, than you can on broadcast television or on cable. But if it's going to be heavy metal magazine stuff inspired, but there's no gore and there's no sex, then it better be really fucking good. Otherwise, what? I mean, we had the Animatrix a few years ago. That was really interesting. I don't know what else there. I'm not an anime guy, so there's not a whole lot out there when it comes to science fiction feature film animation that I can kind of dig into. I've tried to watch Ghost in the Shell a couple of times. Yes, I did watch the Scarlett Johansson version, the totally whitewashed. Let's not hire an Asian actor to play, one of the most famous leading women in a Japanese production from the 90s. That was a crime, but what was not a crime was watching Scarlett Johansson in that bodysuit for an hour and a half. Not sorry. And you know what else I'm not sorry about? I took some of my money I made from repairing guitars recently and bought a new pedal for myself. A new gadget for sound processing of high impedance signals to then amplify for your ears. And it should be arriving in my mailbox sometime in the next 2 hours. So what I hope for is that the next music break you hear is me plugged into that Earthquaker Devices Data Corruptor, is the name of the item, for the very first time, and trying it out on your ears. Exclusive. That's how exclusive the content is here on the Patreon feed. You're hearing me play something for the first time no one's ever heard. How about them apples? And then it's Tosches time. Just figuring out what the knobs do, folks. Just figuring out what the knobs do. No, I meant to do that. I saw it in a YouTube video. Isn't this fun? You don't get this in the main feed, do you? It's like you're right here in the living room with me. It's like I'm doing this all spontaneously while you're listening, observing. Definitely not that I just put my phone in front of the speaker and dumped this file that I really should have trimmed down straight into the episode. Christ, I hope literally anyone in the whole universe is listening to this someday. Maybe after this whole Patreon endeavor fails miserably and I just drag these files into the main feed before I die. Another thing I left out of the heavy metal episode that I wanted to pursue more was the history of early DEVO. I think it would have been pretty lopsided if I kept going, and I wanted to just save some for the benefit of the first Patreon episode. I would like to go back to Simon Reynolds' Rip It Up and Start Again book, Post-Punk 1978 to 1984, and pick up where I left off in the narration from the episode, actually. The narration would pick up here where it says, DEVO evolved into a tightly drilled package of sound and visuals, sharing as much with the shock rock theater of Alice Cooper and the Tubes as with the no-frills punk rockers. Whenever feasible, DEVO gigs began with "The Beginning Was the End, the truth about de-evolution," a 10-minute film directed by their friend Chuck Statler, whom they had originally met in an experimental art class at Kent State. The short generated the enduringly famous images of DEVO. Mothersbaugh as the mad professor in bow tie and white coat giving a lecture on de-evolution. The rest of the band wearing plastic sunglasses and colored tights, pulled tightly over their heads to squash their features, bank robber style. I also learned you should wear pantyhose if you're ever marching through the jungle for extended periods of time to stop leeches from getting into your skin. And it prevents a lot of the damage that leeches can do and their access to your skin. And also, if that's not enough, have chewing tobacco on you and you can mash it into sort of a almost, I mean, probably not like a paste because it's a leaf, but you can mash it up and rub it on your skin with some water. And that solution will actually poison leeches. They can't handle it. Can't handle the nicotine. Now you know that too. Hopefully, you're more likely to be walking through and exploring the jungle in the near future than phone's ringing. God damn it. Then robbing a bank is what I was going to say. That was my friend Michael Arms from Phoenix, Arizona. Roadie to the Aristocrats and sometimes Joe Satriani. He was going to buy... He called this morning to ask if he should buy this 5150 half stack from this dude locally. It's selling it for $900 plus like a $200 delay pedal or some other kind of or some modulation pedal. I think I forget what it was, but all for $900. The thing was beat to shit. The cabinet was, but who cares? It was all good gear. And now he's just sending me a message to tell me that the guy decided not to sell it. That's the cornballs you'd have to deal with when you look for gear on offerup.com, apparently. That's why I stick with Reverb while I can. But I probably will have to move on to OfferUp to sell some of the gear that nobody's buying from me right now. Aren't you glad you know this now? Where was I? Oh, yeah, the pantyhose on their faces to squash their features. Bank robber style. And it was Statler who, in 1975, showed DEVO a popular science magazine with a feature on laser discs, then on the verge of being introduced to the market. We read that it was the same size as an LP but had moving pictures on it, says Mothersbaugh, and we thought, oh my God, that's what we want to do. Originally an aspiring film director more than a musician, Cassell fantasized about making an anti-capitalist science fiction movie and always saw DEVO as a visual entity. The theatrics and the ideas and the staging were as important as the music. Champing at the bit to kickstart the video disc revolution, DEVO were impatient to reach the future. The 70s had been a write-off, merely the 60s sagging into decadence, supine and sour. DEVO yearned to be the first band on the block making 80s music. Like Pere Ubu, they went beyond punk, really the last gasp of 70s rock and roll, before punk even properly existed, not just sonically, with their synths and industrial rhythms, but conceptually too. They shared punk's never trust a hippie attitude, but, says Mothersbaugh, we thought the punks never learned from the failure of the hippies. Rebellion always gets co-opted into another marketing device. Selling out, using the system to spread the virus, seemed like the most insidious strategy for DEVO, who saw themselves as a postmodernist protest band. Putting out the Bougie Boys singles independently was just a step on the ladder, a way of attracting attention. The game plan was to join rock's ruling class. We figured we'd mimic the structure of those who get the greatest rewards out of the upside-down business and become a corporation, Cassell said to the Soho Weekly News. Most rock musicians, they're no more than clerks or auto mechanics. So DEVO gigs started with a bombastic synth jingle, the DEVO corporate anthem, during which the group lined up solemnly to give a salute, because individuality and rebellion were obsolete. DEVO dressed identical so you couldn't tell who was who, said Mothersbaugh. We wanted to look like a machine or an army on stage. We felt that the real mindless uniform was rock's blue jeans. Instead, the group dressed like maintenance worker geeks, says Cassell, wearing outfits he'd acquired during his stint in the janitorial supply company. They built up a mix-and-match wardrobe that blended the regimental, Boy Scouts, servicemen, football teams, and the technocratic, hazardous waste protection suits, rubber gloves. This they spiced with kitsch flamboyance, cheesy alien masks, peculiar plastic helmets styled to look like extremely bad hairpieces. DEVO also developed a tautly choreographed repertoire of jerky stage moves inspired, says Cassell, by seeing a Russian constructivist ballet. And then we played this very precise music like James Brown turned into a robot, and it really pissed everybody off. Well, not everybody. In 1977, things got confusing, at first as Iggy Pop and then David Bowie, then Brian Eno and Robert Fripp jostled to produce DEVO's album debut. Thrilling to the sensations of dislocation and menace that their music induced, Eno raved about DEVO as the best live show I have ever seen. Neil Young, of all people, the grandfather of granola rock, as Cassell nicknamed him, invited DEVO to appear in his feature-length movie Human Highway as a squad of disgruntled, radioactively glowing nuclear waste workers. Iggy Pop was so enamored he wanted to fill his next album with DEVO songs. At the group's first New York show in 1977, July, Bowie came on stage to introduce the second set and announced, "This is the band of the future. I'm going to produce them in Tokyo this winter." Finally, it was settled that the record would be produced by Eno in Germany, with Bowie contributing only on weekends. He was busy making the movie Just a Gigolo. Oh man, I better check that out. We don't even have a record deal, but Eno said he'd pay for the flights, the studio costs, everything, said Mothersbaugh. Eno was just certain we would get a record contract. Sure enough, Warner Brothers, Island, and Bowie's production company, Bellway Brothers, began competing for the group. Sick was hot, and DEVO looked like the next gang of marketable monsters after the Sex Pistols. Then Virgin entered the fray. In early 1978, Richard Branson invited Mothersbaugh and guitarist Bob Cassell to fly to Jamaica. When the boys were very stoned, Branson popped the question, what do they think about inviting Johnny Rotten, freshly fired from the Pistols, to become DEVO's singer? He said, "Johnny's in the next room. There are journalists from NME and Melody Maker here," recalls Mothersbaugh. "It's a perfect time to go down the beach, take some photos together, and announce he's joined DEVO. What do you think?" I was too stoned to make the correct answer, which was, sure! Because we could have done the picture session, got the publicity, and then gone back to Akron and just said, no way, forget it. Still embroiled in negotiations with record labels, DEVO recorded their debut, Q, Are We Not Men? Hey, We Are DEVO, in Connie Plank's studio, a converted farm 20 miles outside of Cologne. It's their masterpiece, but suffers slightly from a neither one thing nor the other quality. It lacks some of the frenzy of their live shows, yet is not a full-on foray into Eno's post-low sound world. In retrospect, we were overly resistant to Eno's ideas, says Mothersbaugh. He made up synth parts and really cool sounds for almost every song on the album, but we used them on only 3 or 4 songs. Some we did, like the loop of the monkey chanters that's on Jocko Homo. I'd kind of like to hear what the album would have sounded like if we'd been more open to Eno's suggestions, but in those days, we thought we knew everything. All right, I think I'll stop there for now. The story about Johnny Rotten has got me curious because I have pulled my copy of Rotten by John Lydon, his autobiography, the 90s version of it before he redid it and re-released it with some other chapters, probably edited some stuff out. I don't know. I haven't read the new version, but I wonder if he mentions it in there, and I'm going to pause and check right now. The reason why I had the Rotten book out was because it is another one of the books I plan to read you for passages from over the course of the Patreon feed. And now that I've gone this long on this episode, I will probably save what I was going to read here from his introduction about the Sex Pistols and stuff in general before he gets into his life story. I'll probably save that for the next episode. But let me check for the Richard Branson anecdote in there about Devo, and I'll be right back. All right, so much to my disappointment, I forgot there's no index in the back of Rotten. No Irish, no Blacks, no Dogs is the full title of the book that I have. It looks like when I go to the Internet Archive, which is archive.org, I see a couple of different publications of it, a couple different, editions of it. And I did a little Control F search through Rotten, and the word Devo does not come up at all. Let me try Richard Branson in quotes. But as I was flipping through the book manually, with my hands, manual, the meaning of the word, to just try to see if there's any mention of it towards the end. And now towards the end, they're still talking about the Pistols breaking up and stuff, or not just the breakup, but the aftermath and arguing about Malcolm McLaren and him taking the boys down to South America and crap. There's mentions of Richard Branson in the book about him and what he likes about him and Virgin Records, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, then if I look into Anger is an Energy, My Life Uncensored, which I don't know if that's like a republishing of Rotten with new stuff added or if it is an entirely different book. It's 537 pages long. It looks like Rotten is 356. So I'm assuming it's just like adding on to the original. But Devo is mentioned 3 times. Page 191 and 192. So I will click the borrow for 1 hour button on the screen. By the way, there's also a book called John Lydon, PIL, Pistols, and Anti-Celebrity, written by a dude named Benjamin Myers from 2004 that I'm going to check out. It's 257 pages, and there's no mention of there's one mention of Devo, but it's just talking about the American punk scene in the late 70s. So no, not what we're looking for today. Let's see now. It's from the chapter Getting Rid of the Albatross. Let me check my time here. I don't want to run into... Okay, there we go. Gunter Grove became my backdrop to get myself properly sorted out and a new group off the ground. So I assume this is post-Pistols and pre-PIL. I was at one of my parties there. It was at one of my parties there that I met Gloria Knight, who was actually a writer for the Sunday Mirror and was married to her editor. We kind of met through someone else in a roundabout social way, and it just seemed deeply hilarious to be hanging around with anyone that had any connection at all with what I viewed as the gossip rags. They'd been making my life a misery for the last year or so. It was like this. Ooh, this shouldn't work. But it did. Good came out of it and bad came with it. She suggested that I needed a lawyer. There was some weird stuff going on around us while we were in Jamaica. McLaren had got some of his people out there sneaking around trying to film me for his idiotic movie, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Also, Branson had DEVO, an electronic band from Ohio who were signed to Virgin out there, or at least some of them. He may or may not have been trying to get me to be their singer. I certainly don't think he ever asked me. Sometimes inebriations lead to foolishness. I know we caught one of them spying on us. He'd come down onto our balcony. He was looking through the curtains, and Dennis frightened him off. That was really my only connection with them. The idea of joining a band like DEVO, replacing the lead singer, would be an absolute no-no to me. It would make me very angry. That was Malcolm's idea with the Pistols towards the end, replacing me. You can't replace the singer. It will always be the band for me, the singer. That's the direction and the persona and the energy of the thing, particularly with DEVO. One of the greatest masterpieces I've ever found in rock and roll historical, I'll say it, literature, is Nick Tosches' Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll. If you've been listening to the show for a long time, you've heard me bang on about this quite a bit. I recorded selections of his introductions to this book on my YouTube channel a couple of years back. And I never get tired of reading it. I'm gonna read all three of these sort of prefaces and introductions now, in the order that they're published, which is a regressive order. Like you have to understand that these are published, newest first, because there's a preface to the introduction and the introduction to the original version and the other version. This isn't on the YouTube channel associated with this show. It's on my previous one where I do a couple of guitar lessons and stuff and some other goofy shit. But then I moved on to another channel where I started populating all the episodes of the podcast. And I'll probably end up taking some stuff down off the old one. I don't know what I'll use it for. I haven't used it in years for anything in particular. But I wanted to read these three sections all together in a row because it tells a really fun story. We go from the most modern at the time, 1998, when this version was published, looking back at the previous versions, and then all the way down to the introduction to the original edition, where he's just talking about the history of rock and roll and the formation of the different articles he wrote that would make up this book. This is a wonderful companion to the Ed Ward book if you want to know rock and roll history, because it just covers in depth specific artists leading up to the Elvis Presley, boom, the bomb drop that was Elvis Presley. This is the wild years before rock and roll was like packaged and marketed the way it eventually became, codified or commoditized for American youth. And the Ed Ward stuff obviously has to take a farther look, a larger look back, up ahead, up behind, and from up top, and give you all the little details it can along the way that made tiny influences. What this book that Nick Tosches created was supposed to do was just collect all these articles he'd written for Cream magazine that were profiling individual artists that did something amazing that he thought was pretty damn cool and should be talked about. And because they were essentially mostly overlooked or not doing well professionally as recording artists or performing artists. When he started, asking them to talk to him for these articles, he had plenty of access because, people weren't just beating down the door to talk to this rock and roll legend. They weren't a rock and roll legend, as we'll get into. So here we go. Starting with the preface to the Da Capo edition, which is the edition I'm holding in my hand, that I have filled with bookmarks and written notes in the margins and marked up with highlighters all the way through. For things that I thought I was going to say on the podcast by now, but it's almost, we're more than 2.5 years into me publishing the podcast, and I haven't been able to cover all this shit. So here we go. So you're going to get it this way, a little bit at a time. Since the summer of 1984, when this book was first published, and increasingly since 1991, when it was last published, it has become a sort of Valley of the Kings of rock and roll. Not only in that it has come to be seen as a pulp paperback cultus of the pharaonic, Pharaonic, pharaonic hepcat gods of rock and roll's dawn, but also because it has been plundered and robbed as repeatedly and relentlessly as the shaft tombs of those caves along the western bank of that sacred Theban desert valley. I cannot begin to count the articles, books, liner notes, and websites that have plagiarized, lifted, and stolen outright from the chapters that follow. One publisher has gone so far as to shamelessly bring forth a piece of shit book bearing the title Unknown Legends of Rock and Roll. Shamelessly, not least because the phrase Unknown Legends is an illiterate contradiction in terms. Now, I have a book in a pile behind me under my couch about the history of the 45 RPM record, and it is full of really interesting details that I have pulled from for a few bits and pieces here and there on, I think, the Chuck Berry episode and the Elvis Presley episode, and I'm going to draw from it on the Richie Valens episode. In the back of that book, you know how publishers will say, if you like this book, check out these fine titles from the same publisher. Yeah, the one he's talking about is in that list. Unknown Legends. Jesus. And this is good. As I explained years ago in the introduction to this book, thievery is the true heart of rock and roll, and I am proud and pleased that this little book has found its place in the true tradition and spirit of that dirty, wanton thieving heart. And good it is, too, gentle reader, to have once again the opportunity to steal a few coins from you. Of all the books I have written, books far better than the slim volume at hand, this is the one that through the years has brought forth more strangers telling me that they never laughed so finely while discovering so much. To have elicited such a response is a beautiful thing that has meant much to me. Almost as much as the $387 that this book has brought me through that same span of years. Nick Tosches, fall 1998. God rest you, sir. I'm pulling off the prophylactic for this one. Let's take the foam off the mic. I was not shocked to find out that he had died. I was saddened to know that he had died in 2019, and I didn't know about it because I was already a fan of his. And I found an article interviewing him from a couple of years previous that he claimed he was going to go out in 2020, I think, somewhere around there. 2021, 2022. Preface to the revised edition. I love this. Sorry. I'm already giggly with anticipation. Anticipation. Now that the 1980s, whatever the fuck they are, like the great Liberace himself, dead and gone, can't we get this whole dumb business of rock and roll out of the way for once and for all? I mean, let's get it straight. Rock and roll is dead. Deader than the 80s. Deader than Liberace. Deader than the papal penis. Dead. Bill Haley, the first white rock and roll star, came, turned to shit, and went all in one fell swoop by the summer of 1954. In other words, the cycle was already complete. The beast of rock and roll has been tamed for the circus of the masses. By the time Elvis, another dead fuck, came along, Elvis played out the cycle again in the span of 6 months. In Milk Cow Blues Boogie, his third record, made in December 1954, raw power has already turned to schmaltz. You can hear it in that well-rehearsed false start, followed by that voice foreshadowing bad beatnik movies to come. Hold it, fellas. That don't move. Let's get real gone. He didn't have far to go from there to Bossa Nova Baby, 1963, after which came the Beatles, or the beginning of rock and roll as culture, replete with a fucking limey accent. Culture, which neither from a Buick 6 in the summer of 1965, nor anything since could save us. Even the idea of rock and roll being dead was old by then. The Maddox Brothers and Rose had recorded the death of rock and roll in 1956. I mean, here we are in the 1990s, whatever the fuck they are, and this rock and roll culture shit is still with us. Take a good look at the bald spot on Paul Schaefer's head. That's what rock and roll is today. A fucking bar mitzvah band led by some fucking asshole baldy. Look under Dion's hat, you'll find something almost as bad. Religion. It's Muzak on the elevator to middle age. What are the Eurythmics but the Steve and Edie of our own dismal descent into the blandness of middle age? Is there any difference between Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and Chrysler's The Pride is Back / Born in America advertising campaign? Is that what rock and roll, in its death, has become? A fucking car commercial? Can anything used to sell beer be alive? Why doesn't that bald fool get his ass down to Carl Perkins' Apollo Hair Systems in Memphis? Better yet, why doesn't he do himself in? Liberace dies and he lives. I don't get it. I mean, I tried to like rap music. It sounded incendiary from a distance. Maybe it was creating strife between the races, something like that. Then I listened to it. I've heard more incendiary lines on Leave It to Beaver. But after all, could anything called black music be any less bland or superficial than, hey, let's get real gone, white music? Public Image? Guns N' Roses? Two Live Crew? It's a painful day when the only people so-called rock and roll can offend are Tipper Gore and the fucking ADL. I mean, I've seen Pete Townsend as an after-dinner speaker at the Waldorf. Don't get me wrong, he was good. A regular Sir Cedric Hardwicke or some such shit, but hey, hope I die before I get old. Sure, that was a quarter of a century ago, but still, he ought to be pushing up daisies by now. And who are some of these guys kidding? Even Lawrence Welk knew when to turn off the bubble machine and call it quits. We live in an age which our Caesars no longer write their own speeches, but instead, like hollow actors, enunciate platitudes written for them. Like so much vapid advertising copy. It has been so long since they have elucidated their own honest thoughts that honest thought itself is instinctively shunned as taboo, as something that might alienate the consumer. Much of the writing in magazines, not only about rock and roll, but about everything, has taken on that same deadening quality, as if writers were ghostwriting their own thoughts to conform to some norm of taste. Time cries and lets you care. Fuck that shit. We Are the World was not rock and roll. It was the sound of time crying. So I don't know what that time cries quote is. If you know what it is, please call in. Leave a comment. And maybe it's Time Magazine. I don't know. Wait. I suppose I could pause and Google that. Let me Google that specific phrase. Hang on. Okay, the best I can do is a YouTube video. It says, Time Magazine flashed Next Generation of Humans, published August 1st, 2022. And it's a song, but the video portion is just a still image of the Roswell Files issue of Time Magazine. And here's the song, Time flies and you are there. Time cries and lets you care. You understand the world we share throughout your world, throughout the land. Time puts it all right in your hand. Enjoy dancing to this little fucking ditty.
Time flies and you are there. Time cries and lets you care. You understand the world we share. Throughout your world, throughout your land, time puts it all right in your hand. Read time and understand.
Read time and understand, people. And somehow that's supposed to be maybe that's like a conspiracy dog whistle of some sort for alien chasers. I don't know. But I can see why that phrase and that song would infuriate an aging Nick Tosches while writing this introduction. Jesus Christ. Maybe real rock and roll is impossible in an age of safe sex, an age in which the youth of America seem more driven by venality than venery. Or venery? Venery. No one's ever said these things out loud to me. V-N-E-R-Y. An age in which yellow suspenders are regarded as a sign of power rather than putzhood. And I admit I checked for that too. I tried to do a Google search on the significance of yellow suspenders and didn't come up with much. I got some results that were about white power symbols and dress, but I didn't actually see on those pages anything definitive about yellow suspenders. But if it's a thing, if it was like the precursor to the Fred Perry shirt, maybe, who knows? Who knows? Things change fast. But what the hell? We are here to praise rock and roll, not to linger at its grave. If we can live without Liberace, we can live without rock and roll as well. This book began as a series of articles for a magazine called Cream in 1979. Cream was one of those magazines which no longer exist, for which one could write pretty much as one pleased. Relatively free of the editorial restraints designed to ensure that neither advertisers nor readers be offended by a politically incorrect sentiment, a scurrilous word, or, God forbid, a sense of humor, I began the series, which bore the same title as this book, with the piece on Wynonie Harris. I wanted to celebrate rock and roll and glorify those who had been forgotten, to show that there was no new thing under the sun, and that what had come before often far surpassed in brilliance and the excesses and pretensions of its pale and errant progeny. 4 years later, in cahoots with Michael Pietsch, P-I-E-T-S-C-H, maybe I should look him up too, who was then an editor at Scribner's, I expanded the series into a book which came out in the summer of 1984. Since then, it's been nice to see there has been renewed interest in many of the characters I wrote about, and much of the music at the heart of this book has been reissued on compact discs, often plugging the book as a source. People have told me how much this book makes them laugh. It surely isn't a serious book. It didn't come into being as such. I wrote it as it came to me, not really caring, with the music itself behind me for inspiration, along with the Internal Revenue Service, I clearly remember. I wanted the book to encompass all the historical facts and arcane data that I had been collecting about the dawn of rock and roll. I wanted to bring all that together in one place. At the same time, I wanted to have fun. That this fun, what else can you call it, even in a book, has been passed along to the readers is the sort of reward that occasionally makes all this typing worth it. If the book leads, as well, to further and wider rediscovery of the music itself, so much the better. In any event, while a slew of factual amendments have been made for this new edition, I messed not at all with its dirty little soul. New unsung heroes have been added, along with a listing of compact disc reissues, but nothing new in spirit. Billy Miller and Miriam Linna of Kicks magazine and Jonas Bernholm of Mr. R&B Records generously provided many of the new illustrations. As it turns out, these are characters whose businesses I can plug with all sincerity. Kicks, Post Office Box 646, Cooper Station, New York, 10003, is a publication that belongs in the home of everyone interested in real rock and roll, fried foods, and the underbelly of American culture. Bernholm's little family of labels, Mr. R&B Records, PL 8300, 64300, Vingaker, Sweden, that's Vingaker, many of whose albums are noted in the Old Noise, New Plastic section of this book, has done more than any company to preserve and further the music at the heart of these pages. I want to thank Dave DiMartino and Connie Kramer of Cream, wherever they are, Michael Pietsch, the editor of this new edition, as well as of the original, my right arm, Noni Waters, my agent and conspirator, Russ Galen, Judith Wilmot, who led me to Virgil's words on the dollar bill, my alma mater, the New York Public Library, and, of course, the unsung heroes themselves. As for myself, I'd rather have the cash. Nick Tosches, New York, 1990. Note, 1998. Jonas Bernholm, truly a man for vinyl, seems to have issued no new records since his release of several CDs in 1994. As of this writing, allmusic.com and bluesworld.com and midnightrecords.com serve as gateways to pertinent recordings and publications. Also of interest is hoyhoy.com. Now you should know, dear listener, that I have looked up Kicks Magazine and the names of Billy Miller and Miriam Linna, and I find the availability pretty scarce of reprints. They're anywhere from $20 to $65, and not so much anywhere on archive.org, unfortunately for me, but I'm going to keep looking. Now, the third. Oh, no. Sorry, excuse me. Now this is the foreword. Then there's an introduction. You know what? The introduction's so good, I'm probably going to save it for next time. Let's do the foreword. Just to put it into perspective, this is from 1989 from a guy named Samuel Beckett. This book will not increase the size of your penis. It will not reduce the size of your thighs. It will not teach you how to profit from the recession or how to make love to a woman. 30 days after reading it, your stomach will still be unflattened and you still will not know how to pick up Jane Fonda during the coming lean years. Such matters are paltry and laughable, however, compared to the hermetic wisdom contained in these pages. Check it out, chump. The true meaning of spodioti, the relation of breast size to talent. What happens to guys who spend all their money on wine? Why a black man named Doc Sausage will never be elected president of the United States. Mafia, a go-go. Who got Annie pregnant? How Louis Prima got that way. How to pick up Keely Smith. Why Elvis was a day late and $1 short. How people avoided sex before there were AIDS and designer jeans. Pills that can change the color of your skin. The price of the first TV dinner and of fame. Why Johnny Ace blew his brains out. How Hank Williams stood off Joseph Stalin. Why Joe Turner didn't give a fuck about flattening his stomach. How heroin can harm your complexion. How much the junk man paid for that heart. How to increase the size of your Cadillac. How to go from stardom to a park bench. And sometimes back. And much, much more in this, the only book about rock and roll that knows what it's talking about. Again, Samuel Beckett, Paris, December 1989. Yeah, the introduction is actually 12 pages long. I'm saving that. So I'll save that for the next episode. You look a little tired. You look a little worn out. You look kind of ragged. Like maybe you need a cup of tea. Maybe you need a sandwich or something. Go get a sandwich. Is it strange to end on an introduction? Yes, it is. Yes, it is very strange to end on an introduction. But sometimes I do things backwards. Such is the way of things when I'm creating a Patreon feed for the first time. I want to stress the fact that input directing me towards new material is always appreciated. In comments or communications, if you try to comment or message something to the effect of, I liked when you did this, but I don't like when you do this, it is not going to be taken into consideration. I can only do things a certain way, and I personally can't stand the people that leave those kind of comments on the Patreon feeds of the creators that I actually patronize. These should be shorter. This is too long. How come you don't do it this way? I don't know. Maybe you're supposed to do it. That's what I say. If anyone's listening and it's like, Jay would be good if he would just do things a different way. But I think that's your own inspiration telling you should be doing something that you're not doing. And you should do it that way. And you should bury me with the kind of creative output that I only aspire to because I'm not doing things correctly. But I do want to say I appreciate any hints or any directions towards, new sources of info or inspiration, movies, artists that kind of connect with the stuff that I'm trying to bring up here. And I don't know, just thanks. Just thanks for giving a shit. Thanks for being here. Thanks for whatever this becomes. it's it's the beginning of March, and I've been unemployed for a couple of months. I've got a broken washer dryer that I've half ripped apart, and I haven't decided whether I'm going to try to fix it by myself. It's very tall, and I have to remove the drum in the dryer all by myself and pull it down somehow, extract it and put it somewhere to change the bearing on it, which is like an $80 part that I have to have delivered for whatever the delivery cost is. And I might just fill it full of pudding, $240 worth of pudding, and push it over the balcony of this little condominium I lived in. Uh-oh. Is that foreshadowing? Am I dead? Am I dead? What do you mean this isn't heaven? All I'm saying, people, is let's get me a new washer dryer unit, okay? Like one of the fancy new ones that's like half as big. It's not twice the size of my refrigerator. Maybe not the fancy new ones. Shitty new ones, actually. They're shittier. They don't have the same capacity as my washer dryer, and they don't use up as much energy. And I'll have to do a lot more laundry more often to accomplish the same thing. But it'll take up less space. And I can take that space and install shelves in the laundry room. And I can put more books there. Books that I'm reading to you. See, I had a point to this. This is circular. It's all, the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. And you know what? From time to time, I might go off the rails. I might read a chapter of like X-Men versus Star Trek: The Next Generation, a book that I own because I found out it existed and I purchased it from eBay for $7. I haven't read it yet. I know it's terrible. I want to read it to somebody. If there's books, if there's stories that you think I should read chunks of on here, because you're going to get it. You're going to get some other stuff that's not that informative. I've got readings that I've done of little like Lewis Carroll poems and crap that no one's heard, and I'm definitely going to dump them on you as an interstitial between other things that I'm working on for rock and roll history. I think this will be a lot of fun, whatever happens. Thank you for being here for the fun. Thank you for being here for the weird beginning of the fun. I hope there's some sort of weird beginning of fun happening with you right now. If it's not, get ready for it anyway. Act as if it is happening, I says.